Idalia. I'm student meteorologist Aaron. So right here at the 6 a.m. hour. If you've been with us since 2 p.m. last night, or I should say yesterday evening, or yesterday afternoon, sorry, I'm a little bit sleep deprived, you can tell. Of course, we've been covering the storm as it's been tracking towards the Big Bend, but now it is the big show, the big moment where we're going to see that center of circulation that will eventually make landfall here shortly across the Big Bend, probably within the next few hours or so. Right now, here is the view out of Tampa right now. Conditions there are beginning to improve as the center of circulation has moved just to the north of that latitude. So for right now, Tampa should be continuing to see better conditions throughout the next several hours or so. Wind should begin to relax here over the next several hours or so. And conditions overall should be improving there, at least across central Florida. Over towards Jacksonville, also remaining, at least conditions there might actually start to deteriorate here pretty soon as the center of circulation gets kind of closer to the Jacksonville area here. And then back towards Cedar Key, where they're continuing to deteriorate right now, and they'll continue to go downhill over the next several hours or so as Hurricane Idalia nears landfall there over the Big Bend of Florida. So here is Hurricane Idalia, now a Category 4 hurricane. And as we've been saying all night here on FSU Weather, this is a seriously unprecedented event, as we've never seen a major hurricane enter in the Appalachian Bay, at least in recorded times, back to 1851. So this is really, truly a historical event here that is unfolding right before our eyes here. So currently the city, you can see the center of circulation right there, right where my finger's at. It's a pretty small core, although there might be some indications that we might be having what's called an eyewall replacement cycle, and that might temporarily actually plateau, or if not slightly weaken the winds, as the storm eventually kind of grows in intensity and grows in at least the wind radii around the center of circulation. So we'll have to kind of watch that and see how that plays out over the next several hours or so. But as we kind of zoom in towards the center of circulation here, we have that center little small core there. We have the greatest winds at this current moment. It's quite possible we could see that expand to kind of more this outer ring here, which if that happens, then we would see actually an expansion of the wind field over the next several hours or so. So as Ian gratefully put a little distance marker here, at least the core is roughly 40 miles or so away from near Taylor County here, near the Big Bend over the next, and of course it will continue to approach the area over the next several hours or so as it does inch its way towards the northeast or so. Over the last several hours, we've actually seen kind of a weird wobbles here and there over the last several hours or so. However, it looks like it's kind of moving more steady or so towards the northeast now, and looks like a landfall is more likely just definitely probably off to our east near Taylor County and near Dixie County, somewhere in this region just south of Perry. So over our area right now, we're starting to see those squall lines come through, the more persistent squall lines come through. Actually, if you're in Tallahassee right now, and do not go outside, but if you have a window to go to, you might see perhaps a little gust of wind coming through. That's because we have those tropical storm force gusts are starting to come through the area, and again, it's starting to deteriorate right now as the center of circulation makes its way ever so closer. We should expect probably the peak timing of or at least of the worst weather here in Tallahassee, more than likely right when it makes landfall here. That'll be at its closest approach to our area. So for right now, at least it appears that we may miss the very strongest winds of the storm here. But again, I don't want to discourage anybody from going outside and doing all that stuff right now. You need to stay in place as we have a Category 4 hurricane here on our doorstep, very close in our neck of the woods. That's making a beeline here towards the upper Appalachian Bay here, just north of Horseshoe Beach and to the southeast of Tallahassee. But at least behind my shoulder here near Panama City, we're staying pretty dry. It's really only when you get towards just off to the east of Bay County into Gulf County, into Calhoun counties is where you start to see that shower, more light activity, and then back over towards the east or so. But we'll kind of go down on the coast towards our south and east there and kind of show what's going on here. So we have a little bit of drier air kind of penetrating into the actual system right here, north of Citrus County and Levy County here. So we have that squall line moving through coastal Citrus through coastal Hernando and Pasco, producing those intense squall lines. But one thing to mention here, we have two active tornado warnings right now issued by the Weather Service in Tampa Bay right now. One just northeast of Arcadia, another one also kind of off to the east of Wauchula here, just off kind of near US Route 17 here, moving all to the northeast along that line. So again, if you're anywhere within this area, just northeast of Arcadia, east of Sebring, and then also, west of Sebring and then east of Wauchula, that's where we have these dual tornado warnings in effect. So you want to make sure you go to the interior room of the structure you're at right now. Get away from those outer walls, as we could potentially be seeing some tornadoes moving through your direction. So correlation coefficient right now looks, I don't see very much in the way of any kind of signature. Maybe a little bit of difference in color there, just off to the northeast of Arcadia, but at least not really evident sign of showing something's going to happen. So it looks like it's radar indicated for right now. But overall, we're going to expect to see potentially the continuation of these kind of events here over the next several hours, even though we're actually here in Tampa, we're pretty far away from the center of circulation. We're still going to be able to see the potential for some tornadoes even outside the tornado watch as well. So kind of putting a tracker on this northern particular, I should say, watch or warning here, looks like it's going to move into Frostproof by 7:01, Highland Park by 7:44, and then 8:05 a.m. by Alcoma if it maintains its rotation there. And then we also do have to watch a few of these little squalls behind near Tampa, or at least near the Tampa area, so Hillsborough County, Pinellas, just still under a tornado watch. They could potentially see a quick spin-up tornado or two here in these squall lines kind of moving in over the next several hours or so. So we'll continue our adventure to the south here to kind of see what's going on over southwest Florida. So kind of a continuation of that squall line moving through Fort Myers, just to the northwest of Fort Myers. Again, kind of the same general idea. We'll have to watch a few spin-up tornadoes here. Although the environment's a little bit less conducive here, at least to the southeastern portions of the center of circulation of Idalia, because of just rotation dynamics here, what's going on. Not as favorable as, say, the northeastern quadrant, the front right quadrant, as many folks at least like to say here on the news. But kind of generally looking at the overall structure of Idalia, looks like it is definitely trying to keep its act together as a really powerful Category 4 hurricane now, winds of 130 miles an hour with pressure down to 940 millibars. So it is definitely deepening. We have the higher winds coming up there as a result of the deepening pressure, with the higher gradient, of course, between the relatively higher pressure outside and the lower pressure towards the center of Idalia. And again, it looks like it appears to be making a beeline towards, looks like just off towards, perhaps the landfall just off to the west of Cross City, so near Sunhatchee potentially. So we'll have to watch it over the next several hours or so. So infrared satellite presentation here does show that we do have looks like a new blob of convection here just off to the west of the system over the last several frames here, kind of right here, if you kind of look where my finger's at, just off to the western portions of that, at least the inner eye for right now. Overall, it looks like it is kind of trying to rebuild back some of its, it look kind of a little bit disheveled here over the past several hours or so, but it looks like it's trying to kind of get its bearing back again as we have that eyewall replacement cycle going on right now, which may temporarily at least prohibit any type of like significant strengthening as we've been seeing over the past 12 hours now. But at least right now, we'll have to kind of watch to see how that plays out over the next several hours. But again, same forecast as we've been seeing and we've been kind of talking to you over the past night here. Major hurricane making landfall here across the Big Bend, catastrophic storm surge, historical storm surge for that matter. Really, it looks like mostly across the eastern Big Bend, about Tampa northward, where we could be seeing excess of 15 plus feet of storm surge potentially there. And so again, now it's kind of too late to do anything if you're there. So the best thing to do is to hunker down where you're at. And again, we always want to say you run from water, you hide from wind because of the situation, because the water is the #1 killer with these systems. So the visible satellite kind of showing the same general idea of what's going on. We have a relatively healthy storm right now, a little bit of drier entrainment looks like into the center of, or in towards the center of circulation, but it might try and recover from that here shortly. But at least we do still have a pretty relatively healthy core in the middle of it. We have that pinwheel eye here. Looks like it's kind of starting to at least overcast a little bit as it's trying to go through the eyewall replacement cycle. Again, as it's moving towards the north and northeast. Tallahassee right now, not seeing any kind of major winds right now, but we could be perhaps seeing some tropical storm force gusts potentially outside right now. So again, we want to make sure you stay safe, stay hunkered down into your interior room right now, because it can get pretty nasty outside. You don't want to be out in the roadways if you can. Just stay indoors. You know what? Have an extra nap. You know, go to sleep a little bit longer, right? It's be a great time to perhaps go to sleep and stay in for a little bit longer here. But right now we are at extreme wind warning is in effect for. I could probably have to pull up the warnings here. If you can go ahead and go to that, just to kind of show you what's going on. And so an extreme wind warning is a rare warning that is issued by the National Weather Service here, and that's only issued for winds whenever they're sustained at 115 miles per hour plus for a given amount of time. And it looks like the National Weather Service in Tallahassee has issued one. So once we get that pulled up on the screen, then we'll go ahead and show you where it's occurring at. My guess is somewhere just off to the south of Tallahassee, as where the anticipated landfall is going to be. Looks like southeast of town here. But again, if you're in that extreme wind warning, you want to make sure you're staying or go to the interior room, because treat this as a tornado warning, basically, because we're going to see those high winds for probably for about at least an hour or two, maybe longer, and you want to treat this as such, because if you are caught outside with that, that's of course the worst of the weather you can see with this storm. So again, thank you, Ian. So we have that extreme wind warning that is in effect from, looks like, just off towards the county line. So Taylor, Dixie, Suwannee counties, I want to say. Lafayette, Dixie, and Taylor counties right now underneath that excessive wind warning. So again, if you're anywhere within this area, so that includes Perry, Cross City, anywhere within those 3 counties there, you want to make sure you stay or go to an interior portion of your room, because this storm looks like it's about to make landfall somewhere near the Tallahassee area in southern Taylor County. So again, if you're in this area, especially on the coast, you want to make sure you get into that interior room right now. Not in a few minutes, not in an hour or so, right now, because you want to treat this as a tornado warning, as again, we're going to have very strong winds of around 115 miles an hour at least sustained moving through this area. And since this is a Category 4 hurricane, and we're not seeing a lot in the way of friction, at least over the water here until it makes landfall, we're expecting to see perhaps conditions around 130 miles an hour moving right through these areas where we have that extreme wind warning. So again, if you are in those areas where there is the extreme wind warning in effect right now, you want to go to an interior portion of your room right now, because this is could be a very life-threatening event occurring right now. So again, I want to stress this enough. We've been talking about this all night. The number one killer here is water. So again, if you are anywhere in this area, you want to make sure you try and seek higher ground and try and get to an interior room as much as you can. But at this point, you should have already enacted your plan and kind of already had an idea of what to do. So actually, if you can kind of put a track towards Tallahassee there, just to kind of see how close it is to the... Okay, so it's actually a little bit, about 30 to 35 miles or so from the coastline. So we're going to expect a landfall here within the next few hours or so. So make sure you stay tuned here on FSU Weather as we continue throughout our live coverage throughout the night here. So again, one last time, we have an extreme wind warning in effect for coastal Taylor, Lafayette, and into Dixie counties right now. You want to make sure you get into an interior room right now and treat this as a tornado warning, because this can be a very life-threatening event occurring right here as we anticipate landfall to occur in this region right here, so just off to our south and east. So Tallahassee is not in the excessive wind warning, but places here on the coast are. So again, you want to make sure you're in that interior room. I cannot stress that enough. So kind of going through some of the satellite views here, we have the visible satellite kind of showing us where that dry socket did kind of briefly come through the center or near the center of circulation, but it looks like that eye might be trying to pop out again. So as it continues on through that eyewall replacement cycle, as it continues to track off towards the north and the east. And again, we want to also stress too that even though, say, Tampa or Fort Myers is not anywhere near the center of circulation right here, we're going to have these squalls continuing onshore persistently, at least over the next several hours as we get into the early morning hours here. And again, a lot of times you could see these little rotating tornadoes here, rotating storms that could produce tornadoes on the ground. At least most tropical conditions here, most tropical rotation here, they do produce tornadoes, for the most part, tend to stay weak. But again, you want to treat this as not just a hurricane event, but a tornado event, also a storm surge event. So this is a kind of a multi-attack system here, and you want to make sure you stay weather aware, at least through time here. So again, this system looks like it's looking to make landfall somewhere just off to our southeast here. So it looks like we're going to avoid the worst of the weather, which is fortunate news for us, but of course unfortunate news for those in Perry where it looks like that's where the worst weather is going to be at, along with the storm surge. From there off towards Tampa Bay is where we've been seeing all night, where we've been seeing those higher water heights that are kind of piling on through the southern Appalachian Bay. Tampa already has at least had some elevated water heights as well in some of the low-lying areas. So we'll go ahead and pass things over towards Chandler to give us an update.
Thank you for that. So we'll go over just a little bit of the overview of the situation. First off, going over the skies here in Tallahassee, we have just seen a rain band throwing a lot of rain on top of Doak Campbell Stadium, on top of us. Of course, we're not in the most thick of it, but we are in a thick rain band at the moment, so it's quite brutal. Atlantic wide view, we'll go over this really shortly. We have a couple systems. We have Franklin, but obviously all of our focus is on Idalia, which is making its way into the Big Bend region and is really getting close to making landfall here in the next couple of hours. So we're looking at landfall somewhere between 8, 9, 10 a.m. 10 if it starts to stall. So we'll see if that happens. But again, we have Cedar Key, which has been quiet, but quiet as in, you know, they've had a lot of rain. You can't really see that, so all we've been pointing at is a bunch of black mass. But you can assume there's a lot of rain out there. Just go watch the Weather Channel and you'll see them whipping away in the wind probably. You see the visible satellite. We have this storm. You actually see the eye start to disappear, which is because the storm is going under an eyewall replacement cycle, which means that that pinhole eye that we've been focused on is finally giving way to a much larger eye that it has to clear out with time. But does it have any time? Not really. So we're not really going to see that eye pop out maybe until it makes landfall. It might pop out just as it's making landfall. As far as aircraft reconnaissance, we haven't had any in a little bit, but we'll emphasize that it's been very important so far for collecting all the data we've been needing. As far as live radar, like Aaron was mentioning, we have this storm and it's really just pushing its way in. Let me just point out this real quick. You see that that eye just all of a sudden disappears. You have the EB little circle right there and it just starts to disappear. That is because that small eye is giving way to what we see here as a much larger eye that is 10 times almost as large. So this whole entire thing, thank you, Aaron, for circling that. It's going to be the new eye of Idalia. So this is what we call an eyewall replacement cycle. It is undergoing it at the very last second. That doesn't mean that it won't probably have enough time to really weaken, because usually with eyewall replacement cycles, we see the storms weaken because of this thing called conservation of angular momentum, but we don't have to get into that. What the main moral of the story is, if you've ever seen a figure skater, she spins faster whenever she tucks her arms in. Whenever you start to spread out your arms, you spin a little slower. So same thing with the eye. A bigger eye means it starts to spin slower, the winds decrease. But by the time the winds catch up to the fact that the eye is much larger, it won't really matter. It's already going to be interacting with the land. And also, we will be seeing, it will be interacting with the land, and so we won't really have to focus on that anymore. Our main focus anyway is just on getting that track narrowed down. We're pretty certain at this point it's going to make landfall in Taylor County, somewhere probably south of Perry, which just means that areas in Jefferson County and south of Tallahassee will experience hurricane force winds. Here in Tallahassee, we could experience some hurricane force gusts. But yes, the eye is going to make landfall somewhere in that Taylor County area. As far as water vapor imagery, again, it's not going to be weakening anytime soon until it makes interaction with that land, so about 3 hours from now. So it's feeding off of the warm water, but at this point, even that is really just kind of nullified by the fact that it's going under the eyewall replacement cycle. The only thing that we can really take concern with the eyewall replacement cycle is it could have a tendency to maybe cause the storm to stall a little bit. So that's something that we will have to keep an eye on. If that does start to happen, we could see a dangerous situation with regards to that. Now, talking about this storm, and we've been mentioning category 1, 2, 3, 4 as it's climbed its way up the Saffir-Simpson scale. It was at a category 1 just 24 hours ago, somewhere around there, maybe it was like 18 hours ago, but it was at a category 1, meaning it was between 74 and 95 miles an hour, surge 3 to 4 feet, but it quickly climbed its way up. We got to moderate damage with the category 2, and then it quickly made its way to 3 and 4 and 5. But all that is, or 3 and 4, it will not reach 5. But all that is to say that with the main threat, it's the storm surge. We've been talking about how the Big Bend is a big, huge funnel for the storm surge, and so for portions of Taylor County and south into Dixie County, we're just seeing a lot of storm surge. And what does that really mean with this Category 4 storm? We're talking about storm surge above 12 feet, which means two-story houses that are near the coast will be gone. Houses a little bit even further inland could be gone. Hopefully you guys are evacuated with that to avoid that situation. But during the storm, which we're currently enduring, continue to stay aware, listen for emergency alerts, take refuge, stay in storm shelters or secure buildings, so don't stay in a trailer home. But also try not to leave either. At this point, just hunkering down is the best thing to do. Also, avoid floodwaters. Stay inside and go to the highest floor to avoid floodwaters. As for post-storm advice, pay attention to local officials for info and instructions. Avoid electrical equipment and floodwater, and also save phone calls for emergencies, and also use your phone to document damages. But keep that thing charged while you still have power. And post-storm warnings, don't wade through floodwaters. Don't run generators inside buildings or near vents. That is one of the leading causes of fatalities after storms, not really related to the actual elements of weather, but to just the aftermath of these systems. Also, don't touch down power lines if you're trying to clear out damage. If you see a power line near you, just avoid that area entirely. All right, so now we've been talking about the preparations / education and what we can expect, but we also are talking about the hazards, and we have these current watches and warnings issued across the area. We have hurricane warnings, and mostly we're focused really on hurricane warnings for the Big Bend region, and also some tropical storm warnings a little bit further out to the west and covering Jacksonville. We also have hurricane warnings stretching into Georgia and South Carolina because the system will maintain hurricane strength as it goes across the southeast. So GFS, again, has this landfall, but we're going to exclude that because at this point we're pretty certain that's not going to be the case. But we will focus on the Euro, which has a much more realistic scenario, making landfall in the middle of Taylor County, which is most likely going to be the case. So we'll see that happen somewhere around 9:30, before 10 o'clock. We'll see that landfall, and it will be over land by 10:11 a.m. Eastern time. And it will make its way across Georgia and into the Carolina, or into South Carolina, and then make its way out to sea. As for the flood potential, again, a lot of heavy rain across the southeast because the system has really large and thick rain bands. So we're just seeing a lot of heavy rainfall with this system. And for tomorrow, we also will see some moderate flooding in the Outer Banks because Idalia is large, just not in the eye. Now, with the GFS rainfall, again, we can kind of exclude this because we already know that the GFS is bringing it too far to the west, most likely, unless there's some quick jump that the storm makes, but right now we'll not bank on that. The Euro is a more realistic option. It leaves us here in Tallahassee getting somewhere around 3 inches of rain on top of what we've already gotten. So that's quite a bit of rain. We've already gotten a few inches of rain, so we're getting closer and closer to that 10 inches of rain mark. And that's all in about 24 hours, which is a lot. So this has been a dangerous event. Lastly, the last hazard, we've been emphasizing this so much, is storm surge. Storm surge is the #1 killer of is the #1 cause of fatalities in hurricane scenarios. That is because a lot of people underestimate the danger and they don't evacuate. Luckily, we've heard about a decent amount of people evacuating places like Cedar Key, where it was at 99% evacuation rate, which is great. And we're just hoping that everybody did heed the evacuation orders, because there's no more time to evacuate. At this point, the rain bands are there. It's better if you stay inside, but hopefully you've evacuated if we're in one of those mandatory evacuation zones. But again, the storm surge is, for our region, stretching from Apalachicola, or storm surge warning is stretching from Apalachicola down through Horseshoe Beach, again going through Taylor County, Dixie County. That's where we have Perry and where we have Cedar Key. So those locations have already been seeing the storm surge because they are on the eastern side of the storm, and the counterclockwise circulation is bringing the water into the area. But I think now we're going to get more into the nitty-gritty on the radar with Robert.
Right, thank you, Chandler. Yes, we're going to dive into the radar right now. We're going to get to what was recently issued an extreme wind warning. We only see those rarely, and it's with major hurricanes that have Category 3 or higher winds. So right now we're going to show you this storm right here. And this is our live radar showing that this storm is still it's kind of not sure whether it wants to go north or east. It had a north track earlier this evening, and then now as we went into the overnight hours into the early morning, it started to go off towards the east, and now it went north and then east, and it's sort of taking a little bit of a stair-step pattern. So we're right now feeling like it's going to be somewhere here in Taylor County for the landfall site, but at this point, pretty much if you are in this area, you're going to see some impacts from the storm, likely some power outages, some heavy winds, some heavy rain as well from this. But let's zoom in here to the storm, and you'll see this outline here. It's a little hard to see because you have that yellow tornado watch in the back, but you can see this outline just south of Perry and west of Cross City. That's an extreme wind warning. Actually, Aaron, if you can query that, we might be able to see it a little easier there. Oh, you can see it with that right there. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. So we have this area right here as an extreme wind warning. The last time we had one issued in the state of Florida, actually, I believe, was for Hurricane Ian, if I remember correctly, and then before that was Hurricane Michael. So you have those for Category 3 or stronger storms, and this basically is equivalent to a tornado warning. It's saying, you know, same as a tornado, you need to get to the lowest level interior part of your home. You need to do the same thing here too. Expect winds in excess of 110 miles per hour, not just a gust, but sustained for minutes, maybe even more than 10 minutes at a time, and that can do damage to homes. That can be like straight line winds. You don't want to see that kind of wind damage. So if you're anywhere south of Perry, west of Cross City, anywhere along the Appalachian Bay coast in this warning here, that is the extreme wind warning, and you need to be taking shelter now. So that's the first thing I want to take care of. Again, I already talked about the track of this storm. It's sort of wobbling north and east. But if you're anywhere here in Tallahassee, you need to be taking shelter. Anywhere in Perry and Cross City, anywhere in this region, particularly that's going to Dowling Park, the I-10 corridor, you really need to be taking shelter with this storm right now. Even as far west as Carabel, you're seeing tropical storm force winds, and we're seeing them here in Tallahassee earlier. So this is the setup for the storm here. I actually want to zoom out and let's address those tornado warnings actually off towards the northeast at the moment. Actually, we have one in Florida. Let's take care of that one first, and then we'll go to the ones in the north and east. So we have this one right here. It's actually a little bit south of the tornado watch, west of Sebring, east of Wauchula, south of Lake Wales. And it's just one of these typical storms that you start seeing popping up here. And if we can go to velocity, and I can show you where that couplet is we're watching with this storm. It's not going to be a very strong one. With these kind of storms, they're very weak. They kind of spin up very quickly, and then they kind of fall apart. But don't take that to mean to take it lightly. As I said earlier in our earlier broadcasts yesterday afternoon, with these kind of storms, even if they are only putting down like an EF0 or EF1, if that hits your house, it's still going to be a catastrophic situation. So you want to be taking these seriously. If you're west of Sebring, US 27, this is US 17, this is Wauchula, anywhere in that area, northwest of Placid Lakes, northeast of Arcadia, here's your warning here in that polygon here. You want to be taking shelter and going inside that lowest level interior part of your room right now. Okay, so here's this warning. Let's go off towards the north and east, and we'll see those other two warnings that we're looking at right now. And then actually, it's now just down to one. I believe there was another one earlier and expired. This is west of Brunswick in Georgia. So for your situational awareness, this is US 301. This is US 1, here's Waycross, and then off to my left here, we have the I-95 and Brunswick corridor over here, and that's the Atlantic coast. So this storm is, again, following that flow of the tropical system. If you're looking at this, you might be used to, in this part of Georgia, seeing tornado warnings coming from a different part, maybe coming from the northwest to the southeast. Well, these are actually coming from the southeast to the northwest. That's just because this is a tropical storm, and it's spinning, and it's moving the storm along with it. So anywhere in Junta right here, this is where, basically right on top of you is where this tornado warning is. You need to be taking shelter immediately. Waycross, you're not in this warning right now, and I don't expect you to be. It's moving a little bit too far east for you to be super concerned for that. But anywhere along this path, I would say east of Waycross, that is my concern for you right now. So again, take that shelter if you're inside that storm right now in Junta or northwest of that. And Aaron's going to put a track on us for here so we can see what cities are in the path. So our times are they're on a little bit an hour ahead here. So this is actually 6:45 a.m. in Otter Creek, 7:09 in Blackshear, 8:44 in Bristol, 7:44 in Bristol, 8:24 in Coffee, and then if it makes its way all the way to Rockingham, that would be 9:01 a.m. in Rockingham. But I'm not sure it'll make its way all the way there. As I said earlier, these can be sort of fickle storms. They can kind of fall apart, come back together. So again, take these seriously, but I don't expect them to be long-tracked or long-lived. Okay, so let's zoom back out here and just sort of get the lay of the land as we have this here. For tornado-specific purposes, this is the tornado watch. But if you're not under the tornado watch, that doesn't mean that that's just all clear and nothing's going on. We have hurricane warnings, including Tallahassee, going off towards the northeast, towards Valdosta, and all the way down into Gainesville and Tampa. And we have a tropical storm warning out here for Jacksonville and Daytona Beach. And I know they just actually issued a hurricane warning for the Georgia and parts of the Georgia and South Carolina coast up here. So we are still concerned about this storm. We are still concerned about the wind speeds that will bring with it, particularly in this sort of swath. It's going to bring the chance for wind speeds that could get up to 110 miles per hour gusts in some places. That can cause trees to fall over, cause down power lines. If you see a down power line, call your local utility company and do not touch it because those can be dangerous. That's important for you to know. As it moves off towards the north and east, those concerns will be extending into Georgia and South Carolina. But right now our focus is still on Florida because that's where the biggest concern is. Let's zoom back in on this, and then after this I'm going to go to IR just to show you how this storm's really developed and a little bit of the trends that we've been seeing over the last 10 to 15 minutes. But again, right here we have Tallahassee, and this is the biggest rain shield we have with the storm. It's now making its way into Tallahassee, and if you're in the city of Tallahassee, I know we've been seeing some winds picking up here. I know I posted a video on our Twitter of what it looks like outside of our studios. Starting to pick up here, seeing some gusts up to 30, 35 miles per hour. I know at the airport we had a METAR gust to 29, so that's pretty much ballpark what we're seeing right now. With this next band, we can expect gusts to possibly increase a little more, maybe into tropical storm force strength. And if this storm does sort of wobble a little bit this way, we could see maybe even a hurricane force gust or two. We'll have to see about that. But right now, I'd say my biggest concern for that wind is in that extreme wind warning here, just west of Cross City and south of Perry, where you're going to see gusts exceeding 110, 120 miles per hour. Max sustained with the storm is actually 130 right now. So you will see winds likely in excess of 120, 130 miles per hour, and that is dangerous winds. You really need to be taking that seriously. And even if you're not right in the extreme wind warning, if you're in Perry, you're in Cross City, you're not immediately in the warning, you will still see dangerous wind gusts, at least above 90 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour. That's still very dangerous. You need to be taking that seriously. That's why you're under a hurricane warning, and that's why the hurricane warning extends all the way over here to Leon County and extends east to Lake City. So this whole area, you need to be staying in shelter right now. Now is not a good time to be going out and driving and getting some food, going to the store. Just hold off on that for now. We can go out and go do that later in the evening today after the storm is completely passed, or tomorrow morning. Right now, we just need to be staying in our shelters right now, taking this storm one day at a time, and we'll just get through this. But we already stocked up on our food, we already stocked up on our water yesterday and the day before. So let's just stay inside now and let the storm make its way through. Once the storm passes, we expect it to pass completely out of the area by the evening today. Everything should all be clear. But right now, these can be some dangerous wind gusts, particularly with this next band that's moving west. So if you're in Wakulla County, you're in Leon County, and you're saying, well, yeah, I just saw it got up to 30 miles per hour, but I'm not too convinced this is going to be a really strong storm going to knock out that much power. Well, you're going to see more with this next band, so you're going to want to stay indoors. At least stay indoors until the storm passes, because as this band starts to move west, and you're going to see this also starting to move south a little bit, those of you in Carabel and Tallahassee and Wakulla County will really start to see these gusts perk up as well. We saw actually a wind gust at one of the ASOS sites, which is just a measuring site down here, or AWOS, sorry, excuse me. There's a little bit of a difference there. It's not too important to get into, but one of the sites down here that got up to 70 miles per hour before the worst of the storm got here. So that extreme wind warning, I know 70 doesn't quite sound as bad as 130, but that's because the worst of the storm hasn't quite gotten there yet. So we're expecting these conditions to continue to deteriorate over the next few hours, and this storm is going to keep moving, and it's probably still about an hour-ish away from landfall. So we do still have a little bit of time on our hands here for this storm to make its way here. So that's why, again, I keep emphasizing stay in your shelters right now, because this is going to be a long, drawn-out event. Even though it looks like, yeah, it's right there close to the coast, it still has about an hour to get there, and then we have all the rest of the storm behind it we have to get through, and then we're all clear. And then we get to start to look and see, okay, down power lines, all this stuff, what do we need to clean up? That's what we get to after the storm passes. Let's move to IR right now, and I can show you what really the development of the storm has been over the last few hours, what we've been watching here in the studio, and what sort of things we've noticed with this storm. We've noticed a little bit of an interesting trend with it, and you can even see it on the radar right here. As the center of that storm has been moving a little bit east, it's been influenced by a cold front off towards its northwest, and that's why it's pushing it this way towards that Perry area. So we've been sort of locked in on a Perry area landfall with this storm over the last hour or so, and I think that it should continue to do that barring any sort of further wobbles. So let's zoom in a little bit further on the storm so I can point out specific trends in the storm's path, but you can see even on the overview here, it was moving off towards the north, then really around 3 to 4 a.m. really started to jog off towards the northeast. Around the start of 5:36, it stopped that and moved off towards the north again, and then now it decided to move off a little bit more towards the northeast again in the last 3 to 4 minutes. So these storms can be fickle. All you need to know really here is that whether it moves north, whether it moves east, at this point it isn't really too important. We're just giving you a good idea of where the storm is going. As it moves off towards the north or east, anywhere in this area, similar impacts are going to be seen relatively everywhere in the area. Tallahassee, probably going to see at most tropical storm force wind gusts sustained, and then gusts up to hurricane force, depending on how close the storm can get. But we're really walked into what we're seeing here in Tallahassee pretty much at this point. Cross City, Perry, this area, you're pretty much locked into really, really high-end wind gusts. We're talking maybe even 110 miles per hour plus in excess of that there. And then Lake City, Dowling Park, still seeing those potential for the hurricane force wind gusts similar to Tallahassee, and sustained tropical storm force winds. What you're seeing right here, what Aaron's putting on the arrows here, is a lot of that moisture and a lot of that storms from this complex moving closer into. So as Idalia continues to move closer into Taylor County, into Perry, these kind of areas, you will start to see these storms continue to strengthen, and you will get some stronger winds, stronger, heavier rain, stronger storms moving into your area. What this IR satellite is, if you haven't seen it before, is basically just showing the heights of the storm. So you have these darker colors, and it's a little more complicated than that, but this is just the simplest explanation. These darker colors there are the highest heights of the storms. So where you see these darker colors, it means these storms are stronger. So that's how we know that at the center of this storm, it's the strongest. But as you can see here, you can see that eye was there, but it's really fallen apart over the last, I'd say, hour or two. And that's how we know this storm's kind of struggling a little bit, which is good news. We're not expecting it to strengthen too much further on landfall. The unfortunate part is it was already a Category 4, so as it makes its way towards Taylor County and the Appalachia Bay coast, it's going to bring those winds that it already had with it. We're not going to be seeing a lot of weakening at this point, just not a lot of strengthening. So we are sort of putting a cap on the upper end of it, but we do still have that really, really strong storm with it. So Aaron just put a track on there just sort of showing that northeasterly movement it has with it, and we're still seeing that as it moves off towards the north and east. And I don't really expect the eye to really form too much at this point again, because it's pretty close to landfall, and once it gets there, it's really going to fall apart. So at this point, it's sort of the last act for this storm in a broader sense. But here in the Big Bend, we will still be seeing very severe conditions from it, despite the fact that it's already making landfall and weakening over the rest of the morning and afternoon and possibly even early evening hours today. So here's the IR satellite. Let's wrap up with a cone here, and I'll just go through the cone of uncertainty here and just show you what we're expecting with the storm as it moves throughout the day, and then I might do one more look at the warnings just to make sure we've taken care of all of the tornado warnings, and one more look at the extreme wind warning just to make sure people are aware of what's out there. But again, the cone really hasn't changed too much over this morning. There's been a few shifts left and right just based on whether it had that northern or eastern jog. But the National Hurricane Center has been very good with their forecasting with this storm, and they've been very consistent with what they've been saying, and that sort of Taylor County landfall has been pretty clear with this storm. So over here is Idalia. Right now it's 130 miles per hour, which is a low-end Category 4 storm. But don't really focus on the low end or high end. Category 4 means it's a Category 4. It's a pretty big, severe storm. It's going to pack a punch, particularly in those areas with that extreme wind warning. So here is that storm right there. If we could zoom in a little more on it, and I could show you where this cone has it going. So that northeast movement is pretty much baked into this storm. It could even be as strong as a Cat 2 in Georgia. I know some models earlier had it down to a Cat 1, but at this point, Cat 1, Cat 2, the difference is going to be fairly minimal to what you see. It's going to be a strong storm when it makes it to you in Valdosta, where that hurricane warning is. So even there, as far inland as Valdosta, you need to be taking shelter and going indoors, because this storm is going to be fairly nasty once it gets up there. And even though you're not going to be seeing storm surge, you're going to possibly have that chance for widespread power outages, things you really need to keep in mind up there. It's going to move its way off towards the northeast, where we have it weakening into a tropical storm off the coast of the Carolinas. And then what it does next, some models disagree. We'll get into that later. It's not really important at the moment. But again, right now, 942 millibars. Idalia is at 130 miles per hour, sustained wind gusts, and it's moving north-northeast at 17 miles per hour. So it's still pretty a quick mover, even though I know it decreased from 20 miles per hour earlier. Still a quick mover, which is a good thing for us. We don't want it to be moving super slow, or else it would cause very considerable rainfall issues. We do have rainfall issues with this storm, and I know some areas in the Tallahassee and Big Bend area, as Chandler pointed out earlier, could see up to 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain in a very short amount of time. So if you are driving on any of your roads, if you are around a creek or stream, remember, turn around, don't drown. It's important in these kind of conditions where you have a lot of rain coming down in a short amount of time. You can see flash flooding really impact those conditions with these kind of storms. So again, turn around, don't drown. Important to remember that even if you're inland, you can see a lot of flooding in some cases if you're close by a storm, or if you're close by a lot of heavy moving water. So again, here are the NHC tracks. If we can go back to the radar real quick, I want to just do one quick overview of the tornado warnings and the extreme wind warning before we pass things off. But right now, again, we do still have an active extreme wind warning for Idalia, which means that those in that warning could see tornado-like conditions up to 110 miles per hour plus, sustained to 130 in some cases, and that is not what we want to see. And we want you to go indoors and head to that lowest level interior room. If you don't have a room at the center of your house, get to a hallway or something that will protect you as much as possible. Again, this extreme wind warning right here, it's a little hard to see just because it kind of blends into the background, but I'm just going to draw it out for you. You have it going down through here on the coast, and then it comes back up through here. That's the extreme wind warning. Anywhere in that extreme wind warning, we do have that chance for powerful wind gusts up to 130 miles per hour. So you need to be going now. You don't have any more time to prepare. You need to be going now into that lowest level interior room. And what I mean by that, I say that phrase 4 words a lot, lowest level interior room. What that means is a bathroom or a closet or a hallway close to the center of your house as possible, because that will protect you from those winds on the outside. We do have again, this extreme wind warning in effect. I wasn't sure if we still had any tornado warnings in effect. I'm actually going to check on that for you real quick before we pass things off. But again, this extreme wind warning is still in effect just west of Cross City, and we do have that one just west of Brunswick, north of Jacksonville, and south of Jessup. Some highways for you west of US 25, southwest of US 84, east of US 301, northeast of Nahunta. So this is actually a new storm that's formed there. So if you're anywhere in that storm northwest of Brunswick, make sure you're taking those appropriate precautions. So we've gone through you with all the warnings and the setup of the storm. We'll continue to keep you updated as the storm makes its way through its landfall. I'm going to pass things off now to Chandler with some storm reports.
Thank you so much for that. Robert. So here at the Storm Report desk, something that we wanted to cover. We're okay.
Taking 1 second. Reports, I know we actually had a 69-mile-per-hour gust at some point, and we do actually have, again, several storm reports of almost 70 miles per hour along the coast. So several significant storm reports around already, and we actually had a lot of street level flooding that we did see in the Sarasota area earlier. And I know some people were thinking, well, yeah, Sarasota, Tampa, we're not exactly going to be in the path of the storm. Even though you're not in the path of the storm, you're not in the cone of the storm, you can still see significant street level flooding. You can see significant storm surge, and you saw that in Tampa and Sarasota earlier today. So it's important to have these storm reports to know what's going on with these storms, just because of how volatile these storms can be and how significant they can affect those areas. So I'm actually going to pass things off to Aaron now to talk a little bit more about the overall setup of these storms and what power outages we're actually seeing in the Tallahassee area, if we can. And Aaron will give us an update on that.
That's right, Robert. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys a quick update on the power outage situation occurring across the state of Florida. We're starting to see a spike in power outages across the Big Bend here, including Leon County as well. In fact, actually here in the studio, we've actually been seeing a couple of power flickers here and there. So we might have to watch over the next several hours or so exactly if the power is able to stay on here. My guess is perhaps we might see more power flickers, but we'll have to watch in terms if we're going to see the all power outages, more widespread power outages here. But just kind of giving you a little overview on different counties here are being affected. So starting off for our southern areas where we see the most significant weather, Citrus County, they're seeing about 4,600 people without power right now across the county. Going up the coast further, Levy County, about 3,000 or so. And then, for the most part, those numbers will, at least in terms of percentages of folks in the county without power, those are going to continue to increase as you go up the coast here. So Dixie County, around 2,500 folks without power. Taylor County, around 3,500, although I expect Taylor County and Dixie County for those to like spike pretty significantly over the next several hours or so, as we will continue to see that eyewall get kind of close towards the get kind of close towards the least landfall there across Dixie and Taylor counties and Lafayette as well soon thereafter. Jefferson County as well, they're starting to see some folks without power. There's 326 people without, to be exact, there without power. And then here in Leon County, about 4,200. That number is likely to go up. And like I mentioned just here, at least in the studios here in Florida State University's campus Tallahassee, we've been seeing a couple of flickers here. So we have to kind of watch over the next several hours or so exactly what will happen here. And we'll try to stay on air as much as we can. But of course, once the power goes out, the power does go out. So again, we'll have to see how long the power will stay on here across in Leon County and elsewhere. Wakulla County has the largest share, at least percentage of folks in the population without power, 8,900 folks without power there in Wakulla County. Again, that likely will probably go downhill, as we could expect to see some tropical storm force sustained, at least down near the coast, if not tropical or hurricane force gusts, or even sustained there along coastal sections. So we're talking St. Mark's all the way down to near Alligator Point, and then near Franklin County as well. They're seeing quite a bit less than Wakulla, but again, we expect at least conditions to start to deteriorate, at least kind of through the perhaps early morning hours there in Franklin County. So kind of doing one more look at the storm cone here. So right now, the 5 a.m. advisory is currently located at 29.1 north, 84.1 west, with maximum sustained winds at 130 miles per hour. And we want to stress this enough too. The 130 miles per hour is not the entire system. It's not the entire area wind field you see right here. It's just a small little area, and even that, a little smaller than that, because at least in terms of the wind field itself, hurricane winds tend to decrease significantly as you get away from the eye. So that center circulation, as it approaches Taylor and Dixie County, where we have that extreme wind warning, as we've been covering at least earlier since the top of the hour here, that's where we see the most maximum sustained winds of around 130 miles per hour or so. So we want to stress again that 130 miles per hour does not apply to everyone within the hurricane, because again, here, if you happen to be looking outside the window here, it is definitely not 130 miles per hour sustained here in Tallahassee. But again, we're seeing tropical storm force gusts at this point. Those perhaps could increase as we see this next squall come in. But overall, the track of the storm continues to go off towards the north and east or so, going through the Big Bend, and eventually into southeast Georgia here. Potentially still as a hurricane, so this could even still pack a punch even in places in southeastern Georgia, so Savannah, Waycross, and along coastal Georgia, into the coastal South Carolina and North Carolina here as we get into early hours, about 24 hours or so from now. But again, the big show is here. It's going to happen here in Florida shortly, or at least in the next 3 or so hours or so, as Idalia does eventually make its way close towards the coastline. So we want to give one last update here on some, or at least on some conditions here with Idalia at the desk with Chandler.
Thank you so much for covering that, Aaron. So one of the major things that we've been talking about has been power outages, and power outages is still a major topic to discuss. Why are we discussing power outages? Well, currently portions of Tennessee Street here in Tallahassee are out of power. Tennessee Street literally is right next to this building that we're currently in. We still have power. We're on campus though, and campus has underground electrical wiring. But elsewhere in Tallahassee, that is not the case. We have a lot of power lines that are going down and transformers that are blowing. We also have power outages on Carolina Street, Appalachian Parkway, and we have multiple reports of transformers blowing, including our very own Ian Munchler was just outside, now covered, but outside in a covered area, and was able to see a green, bright light in the sky. Now, if you yourself see one of these, feel free to report it to the National Weather Service in your local area. That will most likely be NWS Tallahassee, but it could be one of the other offices. Let's cover what those other offices could be as well. But NWS Tallahassee is probably going to be your main go-to. You could also look at Jacksonville as this storm continues to make its way eastward. So Jacksonville, Tallahassee, maybe Tampa Bay. Those are your three National Weather Service offices that you can report your transformers blowing to. So if you have one of these situations where you're seeing power go out, or you yourself have power that goes out, and you still can get a message out by either calling one of these National Weather Service offices or sending them a email, that is the best way. That is one way to that they can keep track of all the storm reports and keep track of, have situational awareness, so they can coordinate with the emergency managers both locally and statewide, and even as FEMA gets involved with this later on. Speaking of FEMA, so this is something that we won't really get into too much until the storm has already made landfall, but go ahead and start thinking about ways that maybe if you yourself are not being impacted can help post-storm. That can involve donating money to an organization like Red Cross or the Cajun Navy. There's multiple Cajun Navies, but most of them have done good work. You can find them on Facebook. When you look into these groups, make sure that they are notable and they have been doing work in other storms. But this is one of the biggest ways that you can help immediately relieve residents that are in these areas as the storm has made impacts and devastation upon multiple people in Taylor County, Perry specifically. We actually have seen some reports from storm chasers that are in Perry right now. In the videos that they're showing, we don't have rights to them, so we're not able to show them on the air. But what we can describe them as is, well, just think about a sheet of rain, a curtain basically, and it's flapping in the wind. That's how heavy the rain is falling, but how strong the wind is blowing. It is quite an interesting and amazing sight, although very devastating. And even Ian Munchler has sent out a similar video, and it's one for here in Tallahassee. We're not getting the same exact effects as Taylor County. Of course, Taylor County is where we're expecting the eye of this storm to make landfall. Speaking of the eye, again, to reiterate, we did talk about how there was the eyewall replacement cycle. So now it's just one big, huge eye somewhere around 80, 70 miles across. Now, The implications for that, if this were to be several miles, or if this were to be several hours away from making landfall, would be that it would lose intensity. But at this point, the winds will not lose intensity quick enough, so we'll still see those Category 4 winds impact, and they're currently probably impacting places along Taylor County, Dixie County, and getting into Jefferson County. That correlates with the extreme wind warnings that we saw issued by the National Weather Service here in Tallahassee. They issue them for Jefferson County, for Perry, and Taylor County because those really strong winds that are basically the equivalent of a tornado, but for a sustained period of time. That is not a good situation. When you have then one of those things, when you have that type of thing happen, you're looking at structural integrity issues. And so expect a lot of roof damage here in the next few hours. As the sun rises, we'll see a lot of people assess roof damage and come to realize that they'll need to put a tarp over the roof. Of course, that's just an unfortunate but necessary procedure. And again, if you are not in the impact zone and you want to help, you can donate money or you can volunteer this long Labor Day weekend to come down and help with relief efforts. The locals here would really appreciate it. I can speak from experience helping with Hurricane Hurricane Ian recovery damage, and basically it was a recovery response, and it was really helpful for them, for us to. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Aaron, and he's going to cover more in depth about Tallahassee, getting more in depth with the reports that I just made.
So actually, I'll be just kind of putting over a more geographical map over what Chandler was talking about in terms of the power outage maps going on right now. So it looks like most customers that are reporting power outages across the metro area, it looks like it tends to be in northern portions of Tallahassee again. So north of Tennessee Street seems to be kind of where that area where we're seeing the most power outages being reported. Again, I wouldn't call these widespread power outages, but certainly increasing in numbers as we have increasing winds coming across the area. And again, would not be surprising to see more of these as we go on through the next couple of hours or so as Idalia continues to make its way near landfall, and we get, of course, the closest to the center circulation with the highest wind. So just wanted to put a little geographical map towards that in terms of power outages across the metro area. But here's kind of that radar view. Not as detailed as what we've been showing you on our wall here earlier, but again, we can clearly see that inner core eye looks like it is kind of rotting away and making way for this bigger eye, potentially almost, we actually were measuring earlier, almost quadruple the size potentially of the previous eye. And that would implicate that this is going through an eyewall replacement cycle, and that, as Chandler alluded to earlier, kind of following the theory of angular momentum here, the conservation of angular momentum, where if you take a figure skater and have say your arms out, you're going to go spin a lot slower, but then if you start contracting your arms in, you can start spinning a lot faster. You can also even try the experiment too in an office chair if you're safe enough and don't get dizzy. But the same principle with a hurricane as well. So that's what we're seeing occurring right now. So it looks like it may not. It looks like again it may not get much more stronger than this as it nears landfall. But again, it's still a really powerful Category 4 hurricane. It's not something to take lightly here as we have this continuing and unfolding across the metro area, or across the Big Bend, I should say. One thing to kind of note that looks like, at least kind of untraditionally speaking, with most tropical systems, it looks like a lot of the precipitation is actually occurring on the north and the western side of the system. And that perhaps could be actually due to a trough that's kind of digging in and what's helping it to kind of steer out towards the north and east here. So that's why we're seeing somewhat higher rain totals, perhaps just off towards the west of the center of circulation. So we'll have to watch that closely here across the Tallahassee area. But for the most part, at least I'm suspecting probably just off to our east, but just off of the west where it makes landfall. So likely Jefferson County is where we're going to see probably the heaviest rainfall occur, as at least we might see some training going on, which is when you start seeing constant rain showers in one particular area. That, of course, can cause some flash flooding potentially. But again, the storm looks like it is moving off towards the north and northeast here, approaching Taylor County and Dixie County, where we have that extreme wind warning in effect. So in other words, winds are expected to hit about 115 miles an hour or greater, sustained over the next couple of hours or so in coastal Dixie and Taylor counties, where we expect the eyewall to make landfall there, the eye of Idalia to at least make landfall there. Again, we could see a couple wobbles, but again, it's not going to be anything significant to the point where we'll see any kind of changes in terms of our forecast, what we expect here over the next several hours or so with that landfall there in Taylor County. But we'll send things over to the wall with Robert.
Right, we actually have an update for our storm. It has been downgraded to a Category 3. So as it starts to it's almost making landfall here. It's not quite making landfall, but it is starting to weaken as it gets there. We thought this is sort of what we thought was going to happen because it sort of lost strength a little bit. It's sort of had a little bit of a weaker look, and it's now downgraded only about 5 miles per hour. So it's from 130 to 125. So still a very potent storm, still a very strong storm for those of you down here. I know we have a lot of viewers that are viewing from the Tallahassee area or who have interests or family from the Tallahassee area or connections to the university, Florida State, or Florida A&M. For those of you, I have to say at this point, our biggest concern is going to be power outages. Most of the winds we're seeing here in Tallahassee are tropical storm force or Category 1 force. What we're seeing for this Category 3 force is down here. It's about 2 hours away from Tallahassee. It is down towards Perry and Cross City down here. That's not saying we're dismissing this at all. There are a significant portion of our viewers also down here, and we are making sure that you know about this extreme wind warning. If you live down there, you need to be getting into this lower level interior room away from the windows and the outside walls of your house. We do also have 2 tornado warnings. We have one along the I-75 corridor, and we actually have one up in Georgia, west of I-95, west of Brunswick. So again, this is our current situation right now. We do have this storm continuing to develop and continuing to look like it is going on this weakening trend throughout the day, and as it makes landfall here, it's going to continue to weaken. That's what we're looking for as we see that this storm is going to hopefully start to fall apart and hopefully not cause that big of a risk for people, but we do still have a significant amount of rain and wind with it and a significant amount of threats as we do see this storm. Look just the size of the storm. We do see all the way from the south here to the north. We need to clear all of this before we really start feeling good about people in the Big Bend region. And right now we still have at least a few more hours before we get there. So in Tallahassee all the way over to Lake City and points in this area, you really just need to be staying sheltered in place, even if you aren't seeing these strongest wind gusts, seeing up to hurricane force, maybe even tropical storm force, hurricane force here in Tallahassee. You still need to be sheltered in place. This is still a dangerous storm, and please continue doing so over the next few hours as we continue seeing this storm. So again, we do still have a significant situation with these tornado warnings here and that extreme wind warning. This storm will continue to develop, and I'm going to put the track up here just so we can see how this storm is going to develop. Right now we're looking, it is going to move off towards the northeast, and it is going to move out of the Tallahassee area very quickly. It's moving at 18 miles per hour now, so it's going to move very quickly out of the Tallahassee area, and it's going to really clear here by the evening hours today. So by then, we should be able to start to assess any damage. We should start to assess any power outages, all of that. But right now, we just need to get through this storm. This morning and this afternoon are all about just getting through this storm. Once we're through that, we can talk about the rest later. It'll move off towards the north and east, and then it will start to become a concern for those of you in Georgia and South Carolina before it ultimately clears into the Atlantic. So again, this is the situation with the NHC tracks. This is the situation with the storm. To all our viewers in Tallahassee, we're going to continue to keep you updated with the development of this storm. We do appreciate you for joining us for our hurricane coverage over the last few hours. As this storm does make landfall, I don't think it's made landfall just yet. We don't have any confirmation from that. So we're going to stay on air until it does make landfall, and we'll continue to keep you updated with that right now. But we do still have this storm moving north and east. Let's actually put radar back on so we can just show you where this storm is in relation to the coastline, and we can really see how this storm is making landfall and what communities are being most impacted by the eye wall. Because I know a lot of people think, well, the eye is the center of the storm, it's the calmest area. That's true, but the area right around the eye and the eye wall is actually, that's the most concerning part of the storm. That's often where you see the heaviest rain and the strongest winds right around that. So that's why we're just a little concerned about that area. That eye wall area is moving east of Tallahassee, so we're not too concerned about that for Tallahassee. It's more about the sustained tropical storm force to hurricane force gusts that are no slouch. Those are also concerning for us, and that's going to be the case over the next few hours. But the immediate concern for us, the life-threatening situation we're concerned about, is this extreme wind warning down in Taylor County and this area by Perry and Cross City. That's where we have those highest conditions for that 100 mile per hour, 110 miles per hour, 120 miles per hour conditions. And that's, just imagine driving down the highway at 120 miles per hour. That gives you the idea. Put your hand out the window, it's not going to feel very good. That gives you an idea of how strong these winds are. But just to give you an example of that, here in Tallahassee, we could be expected to see it gust up to maybe 60, 70 miles per hour today. That's still freeway speeds. Imagine sticking your hand out the window of a car when that happens. That's still not going to be very ideal. So that just gives you the idea of why we are still concerned. I know even Tallahassee isn't the immediate concern here, but still concerned for points like Tallahassee and Wacola County and Lake City with this chance for power outages, because these gusty winds can really blow over some older, oak and trees that have that chance for having damage on some of these power lines, particularly where you don't have buried power lines. So that's where we have that concern. So I'm going to put back up the radar here just so we can see where this storm is, and it looks like it's pretty much about to make landfall within the next few minutes. Here it is right here. That's where we are looking for that eye. Here's this extreme wind warning I do keep talking about. That's where we have that greatest concern. If we can zoom right in on that eye area, we can see it's pretty close to making landfall. I'd say probably give it about 15 to 20 more minutes here. As this eye is there, it's about 13, 12 miles away, and we do have it clocked at about 17 miles an hour. So, you can do the math from there. I'd say it's probably about at most a half an hour away from landfall. And we are saying it's, this is where we have Perry up here. Horseshoe Beach, we had a gust up to 70 miles per hour before the worst of it got here. Could you actually put velocity on here? I do know there are some gusts that we're going to see here well in excess of 100 miles per hour. And that's our primary concern for these areas along the southeastern portion of the Big Bend between Horseshoe Beach and just southwest of Perry, because that is where we have those strongest wind gusts. That's where we have this storm really moving in. And again, this eye wall, if you're going to be in this eye wall here, you're really going to be feeling not just the strongest wind gusts, but also the heaviest rain and a lot of lightning. And that's where you have that worst condition for power outages here. So again, this is the eye wall. It's sort of a half moon shape. It's not exactly the most classic of eye walls. If you've seen any of the Hurricane Andrews of the world, where they have a very fully formed eye wall, this storm is a little bit limped into its landfall here. And I say limped in a bit of a comparative sense, because it's still a Category 3 storm, just comparatively to how strong it was right off the Gulf Coast here. But you can see that eye wall sort of deteriorating a little bit as it gets here, and it formed a little bit back up, I'd say, in the last few frames, but still it's about to make landfall here, and we have this coast. So this area right here, southwest of Dowling Park, and it's right along the Appalachia Bay here. This is where we have the strongest area of heavy rain and strong winds. And again, if you're driving in any of the Florida state roads down here southeast of Perry, now is not the time, because there are a very large amount of pine trees in this area, and some that are old and be very susceptible to falling over. That's really where we have that biggest concern for us right now, is if you're driving in this area or even live in this area, you live in a manufactured home, these trees are going to cause significant damage to that area. And that's really a big concern for us. And even if you don't live in a very wooded area, though most of the area down there is fairly wooded, you don't want to be in any sort of mobile home or manufactured home, because that just won't really survive any sort of those strong winds that will get blown away from its foundation. It's not going to be a very good situation to be in. It's like in a tornado, you don't want to be in a mobile home at all, because you have that foundation, because you don't really have a solid concrete foundation. You don't have that solid brick structure to protect you from the storm. It's not going to be an ideal situation at all. So if you do have a place where you can go to very quickly and you can get away from it in a solid, firm foundation within the next few seconds, go there. But right now it's getting a little bit on the too late side if you haven't done that already, just because of where this storm is and how it's about to make landfall very soon. So again, we do have this storm right there, and that's where we have those strongest wind gusts in that eye wall there, as we're seeing it really start to take shape on that north side there. This side's really been dominating all night, but we do have Yeah, right in there, that's where we have those biggest concerns for those 110, 120 mile per hour wind gusts with this storm. Again, this is just not something that we see in this area a lot. And we did have Hurricane Michael off towards our west a few years ago, but this area, this specific part of the Big Bend, has not seen a storm this strong in a very long time. We had a Category 3 in the 1800s and a Category 3 in the 1950s, and they were both far south of here. So this specific area has not seen a storm in recorded history that's this strong. Again, that's why we're just so concerned about this. The worst of those winds are not going to be making their way to Tallahassee. I just want to make that clear. We're not seeing Category 3 wind gusts here right now, but we are going to be seeing, as these bands continue to sort of filter in, a little bit more of that tropical storm force and it's getting up to hurricane force wind gusts here in Tallahassee. So this area down here, and for our out-of-state viewers, I want to just sort of give you an idea of what this area is. I know some people think Florida is just a lot of beaches and a lot of resorts, and everything's super accessible and easy to get to, but this area is not like what you imagine parts like Miami Beach are destined to be. There are not beaches down here. This is all a lot more similar to the Louisiana Gulf Coast in some ways than it is to a lot of the other Florida Gulf Coast. This is very marshy. It's very hard to get to. There are not a lot of roads in and out, and it's very, very dense with trees as well. So that's why we're just so concerned about this, because it's really hard to get in and out of this area once you're already in there. So again, that's why I just sort of emphasize this area with the extreme wind warning, but we're going to zoom back out to the storm as a whole and just show you that this eye wall, it's really starting to try and come in around this area. It's going to try and form a new eye wall, a very larger new eye wall. I don't think it's going to be able to do that because, again, it's going to be facing land here, and that's a huge deterrent to development here. A good thing for us. Maybe we'll have to rewatch for that as it moves off the coast, the Atlantic coast, in a few days, but right now it's not really looking in a good position to develop any further. We already saw it decrease 5 miles per hour. I fully expected the next update for it to decrease even further, and those are good news for all of us in the Big Bend. So we're seeing a lot of this heavier rain, these heavier gusts moving a little bit around this area of circulation, and if this band makes it here to Tallahassee, we'll probably see some tropical storm force wind gusts as it gets here, and that will probably be within about 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour. We'll have to see as the track of the storm may keep it from getting here, but it will, even in these outer bands that Aaron's drawing on here, there's still strong bands of storm development here, and these bands are still going to give you quite the punch with these winds. And we've already seen some blown transformers here, and we do have power outages here in Leon County, but there are significantly more power outages along the Big Bend coast here. So this storm is definitely going to be in its weakening phase soon, but I don't want anyone to let their guard down immediately. We just have to get through the whole storm first. Just because it's weakening doesn't mean it's not going to pack that punch. It's not going to have those winds. It's not going to, I mean, we even saw power outages here in Tallahassee a few days ago with a completely unrelated, just summertime storm that didn't really have anything to it. So that just gives you an idea that this is a far more powerful and far stronger storm, and it could cause power outages along the area. We don't say this stuff to hype, or we don't say this stuff to make people nervous. We just want to make sure that we're leveling with everyone and everyone knows what's possible here. And I want to make sure that everyone's prepared and everyone is completely ready for what we're looking at with this storm. So we do have this eye wall continuing, and in the last few frames, I'm starting to see it build back a little bit here. So if you're in eastern parts of Taylor County, you're going to start to see some heavier rainfall rates really get in, and with that, you're going to actually see those winds start to pick up a little bit more with you too. But right now, the center of the storm, very close to the site of landfall, where it's likely going to be west of Cross City here and southeast of Perry. This area is going to be going through 110 mile per hour, 120 mile per hour, 130 mile per hour wind gusts with this storm. So we are going to be watching it as it continues to go towards landfall. I don't believe it's made landfall just yet, but we're continuing to watch that and see if the storm is continuing to get to that point. So again, right now, if you're driving on US 98, if you're driving on US 19, we're still saying that you need to not be making any sort of driving in that area right now, just because it is a dangerous area with 125 mile per hour wind gusts right now in that region. And with all those trees, it's going to be really hard to drive through that area in the extreme wind warning. That's why they have that warning out, and it's going to continue to be out. Actually, I believe it is until, excuse me, it is until we have until 15 UTC. So that's, let me do a math on the fly here. That is actually going to be 9 a.m. here. So we actually have a few hours left in that warning for the area. And that's fairly reasonable to assume because this storm is going to take a while to get through. So the area around here will not be clear of it immediately. You can see how this eyewall right here on our radar is taking a while to actually get through the region. And if we can actually see where these areas are with the highways in the cities here, that's really just going to show you that it's not a very densely populated area, so that's not our biggest concern. But at the end of the day, there are still people who live out here, some of our viewers who live out there, and that's why we're so concerned about this, just because this is the area, this is the of the highest impact from this storm. We'll zoom on out just to make sure everyone's taken care of, and that everyone, we do make sure that those on I-10, you don't want to be driving on I-10 right now. This is not a good idea. We're seeing tropical storm force wind gusts sustained all the way from Lake City in the east, all the way far west of Tallahassee to the Chattahoochee River out here. This is where you have that central time zone, eastern time zone border. If you know driving from the west towards Florida State where that is, this whole area is going to be under sustained tropical storm force wind gusts, heavy rain, lightning. You don't want to be driving along I-10 here. Along I-75, you don't want to be driving anywhere north of Gainesville. That's going to be heavily impacted by this storm as well. A lot of rain, heavy wind gusts, and heavy rain and lightning with this storm. And even ultimately, we'll also look towards I-95 as having a chance for having those travel impacts from this storm as well. Tallahassee International Airport has closed flights for today. I believe it is for today. I'm not sure if they include tomorrow as well. But travel from Tallahassee right now is just not very easy. It's just because the storm is making its way through. You don't really want to be traveling in these conditions. You don't want to be walking around even when it gets too windy. You definitely don't want to be driving, and you don't want to be flying during it. Not good time right now to travel. We'll just have to wait until this storm goes through. And again, I would say give it at least 2 to 3 more hours for this storm to really start to get the worst of it through, and then probably about 6 to 7 hours for you to really start to see that clearing out from this storm as it moves through the Big Bend region. I also want to point to storm surge as something, we haven't mentioned that quite a lot, but that is one of the most discrete threats with this storm. As we've seen it move towards the north and east, we have seen this storm really push a wall of water ahead of it and put a lot of storm surge along the coast. So we saw up to 10, maybe 15 feet of water in some cases. And just to give you an idea, stack 3 people on top of each other that are 5 feet tall. That is very, very high and going to get to at least your first story of water, and it's going to get a lot of inundation in those areas down across the coast. So we have places like Cross City here in the marshy area, southwest of Cross City. City of Cross City should be relatively fine, but the area southwest of Cross City in the marshy area, and then specifically down here is Cedar Key. You might have seen Jim Camptori in Cedar Key earlier. We had some reports from Cedar Key of power outages down there, and the city is mostly flooded because it's a key out there, and with that 10 to 15 feet of water, it's putting most of it underwater. So that's a concern for us. Any storm coming up the Appalachian Bay has a very distinct threat for storm surge because as it pushes that water up, the area over here is fairly shallow. So the problem is if you don't have a fairly shallow water, if this area off the coast is fairly deep, it can sort of absorb that storm surge a little better. But because it's very shallow, it allows that storm surge to really rush up and into our marshy areas down here on the coast. And that's really a concern for us for those areas like Cedar Key and into basically this whole area of the extreme wind warning as well. That's where we're seeing the heaviest impacts and also that storm surge. But again, also, as I said, Tampa Bay does see storm surge as well. So we are seeing up to 2, maybe even 5 feet in parts of Tampa Bay, and we're still even seeing a lot of these remnant sort of actual storms with this, these sort of outer bands with this tropical storm here moving through Tampa, and we still have about 2 to 5 feet. So when we have sunrise here in, I'd say, about 30 minutes to another hour, we're going to really see the extent of that storm surge flooding in Tampa. I don't think it's going to be pretty good. We don't want to see that kind of storm surge, and even though the storm didn't go there, that's why it's always important for you to take those precautions if you ever go under a storm surge warning or a hurricane warning. So that's our concern for Tampa. We also saw some storm surge all the way far south as Fort Myers. Some of that will now begin to subside as the storm moves through. Our biggest storm surge concern is immediately for this area right here, the Big Bend coast. As the storm pushes up here, you'll continue to see this storm surge up to 10, 15 feet in some cases as this storm continues to move. And we are having a chance for storm surge on the Atlantic coast as well. Jacksonville up into Myrtle Beach could see 1 to maybe even 5 feet of water as we see that as these offshore winds from the storm push it onto the coast there. So that's our concern for that storm surge as we continue to see this storm develop too. So let's actually go back to the spaghetti models if we can and just sort of show you the future track of the storm for some of our viewers in Georgia and South Carolina who might be wanting to know a little bit more about the ultimate track of the storm. So a lot of consensus through the Big Bend region as it continues to move off, a lot of consensus through here as it continues to move off towards the north and east, and but we really start to see a lot of divergence as we get into South Carolina. We actually have one model that's going off towards the north, or a little bit west of the rest of these models. That's a little bit of an outlier there, but if we could zoom out a little further and just show you this situation here, as we get further in time, these models sort of diverge a little bit, and ultimately past that Sunday period, we don't really have a good idea of what's going to happen to this storm, but it does look like ultimately it could move off the coast. I know there were some models that were suggesting it could curve back. Not a lot of credibility in that at the moment. I would just say stay tuned, but right now we don't want to really put a lot of fear and panic because there really is no reason to. There's not a lot of models that agree with that solution. As you can see, most here just sort of put it out into the Atlantic here and just have it sitting there, and that's all we have for this storm. So that's what the spaghetti models are for the track of Idalia, and that's what we really have to see here over the next few minutes and hours and days and weeks as this storm develops. But I'm going to pass things back off to Aaron to talk a little bit more about our setup with the cone of uncertainty with Idalia and just show you the future of what we can expect to see from Idalia over the next, we would see at least in the next few hours and in the next few days. So it's going to take me just 1 second.
That's right. So again, not much in the way here of looking at where it's going to go because we kind of already know it's going to make landfall now. Taylor County over the next few minutes or so as we see the geographical center of Idalia go into Taylor County. Unfortunately, it looks like they're going to see the brunt of the worst of Idalia here. But again, as of the latest advisory, Idalia is 29.6 north, 83.6 west here, or I should say 8 west. Winds at 125 miles per hour, so it decreased to a Category 3, but as we've stretched here, what's the difference between 125 miles an hour and 130 miles an hour? Not much. So Category 3, Category 4, Joe Schmo, it's still the same thing, still the same impacts we're going to see here. Pressure went up a tad bit to 947 millibars here, so it did go up a tad, which would indicate partially due to the eyewall replacement cycle here, currently undergoing with Idalia here, in that we have a brief weakening of the winds because of that slightly higher pressure, relatively speaking, with their system. But you can see at least the big major core of it, the big major core of it is still a little just right here, about a bump onshore into Taylor County here. And then the broad outside of it here, so the tropical storm force gusts are starting to make their way into Tallahassee right now. So again, you might see at least some of those squalls might get up to that point where it could be quite breezy and windy outside. So again, the storm is moving off to the northeast at 16 miles an hour. So quickly it should be moving off towards Georgia. This, at least the NHC cone has it as going down to about a Cat 2 as it enters into Georgia. So it still could be a hurricane even as it traverses the state over the state line near I-75 or so, and then across the coastal sections of Georgia into coastal South Carolina. So again, we want to make sure that even if you're in Georgia, South Carolina, that you understand that this is a strong storm coming your direction. Even though it is affecting, making landfall in Florida, it still has the potential for impacting quite a bit in terms of coastal areas of the Carolinas as well. So again, storm is going to be booking it off toward the northeast here at about 18 miles an hour. To again, just kind of show you exactly what's going on with the storm and how it's quickly intensifying here, or up until landfall here, so or at least overnight, as we've seen over the past few hours or so. But at least the good news is the trend should be weakening as we go over the next several hours or so. But I do kind of want to show you a little bit about the Saffir-Simpson scale a little bit here as we're kind of going into really the major part of the event here. So again, we are at a Category 3 Hurricane Idalia now, but again, not much of a difference between Cat 3 and Cat 4, as you can see here. We do still expect pretty significant storm surge and, of course, wind rates here across the Big Bend, especially down with our friends in Perry. So at least we're expecting near 15 feet of storm surge near at least that Big Bend coastline. And again, water is the #1 killer when it comes to these tropical systems. The saying, as we've been saying here all night here, sound like a broken record, but you run from water, you hide from wind, because water is the #1 killer, the #1 cause of deaths, unfortunately, with these tropical systems, as people can get trapped in their homes and drown potentially. So, thankfully, we did not get to Category 5 status, or at least stronger Category 4. We were kind of on the cusp between a 3 and a 4, so that is good news, but still, we're going to see some pretty significant impacts regardless of that. So, kind of where we look at storm surge, which is the height, the sea level rises above normal sea level, I should say, due to a landfalling tropical system. So we have wind in this diagram coming off from the right-hand side of your screen to the left, indicating that we have winds blowing the upper waves here towards the land, towards this house, unfortunately, this poor fellow's house. So normal sea level would bring you right here. However, if you have just 3 feet of storm surge, it would take you to kind of a little bit upwards of that slope, and then 6 feet kind of taken to this guy's store step, and then 12 plus feet really just about to the roof, according to this diagram. But that can, of course, change depending on different house anomalies that we have around the Big Bend. But again, we want to stress this enough that you want to make sure you're not here for the storm surge. And by this point, you should have already made your plans already what you're going to do in the event of this currently occurring here across much of the Big Bend. But it's not even just that there, too. We have even places in Tampa beginning reports of some storm surge as well there. Even though they're well displaced from the center now, we've been getting reports of some flooding near Bayshore Boulevard and in South Tampa because we had that water being shoved into Tampa Bay. So part of it has to do with the wind direction. The other part of it also has to do with the topography or the geography of the land. That's not really helping the situation down there either. So there, even though they didn't get a direct landfall, they are getting some flooding in some low-lying areas in Tampa there. So during the storm advice, so right now, what you're shooting right now, here, you want to stay aware. You want to listen for emergency alerts. You want to take refuge, stay in storm shelters, or go to a secure building like we are here at the Earth and Ocean Atmospheric Sciences Department here at FSU here, as we're taking also cover from and bringing you the live coverage right now from about Hurricane Idalia. And then also you want to avoid flooded roadways as well because, again, you don't want to get caught in those flooded waters there as it could potentially be fatal. So post-storm advice, this is kind of after Idalia passes here, so this is probably in the next couple of hours, I should say at least starting the next couple of hours and then onward from there. We want to make sure you pay attention to local officials for info and instructions because we could have down power lines, down trees, and it can be kind of difficult for, let's say, to travel out of said area. You want to avoid electrical equipment and flood water. So again, just because you see a power line down on a roadway does not mean you should go out and touch it. That would be a terrible idea to do so because you not only, you might put yourself in danger of being electrocuted, unfortunately, and some people do fall to that. So you want to save phone calls for emergencies and document damages only, especially if you are in a power outage. And again, you want to make sure even if you're not in a power outage yet, you could still be later on. So you want to make sure you keep those devices charged still until that point, and then you want to make sure, again, you use them sparingly as you go on after the storm. So some of the post-storm warnings here, again, you don't want to wade through flood waters. Do not walk into flooded waters. That is a dangerous thing to do, especially in Florida where it could be muddy as well. You don't run generators inside buildings or near vents that can cause problems with carbon monoxide poisoning. as that is also an issue here in some places in Florida and some other places across the country too, with people running these generators inside. So again, if you're going to run generators, wait until it's safe to go outside and then run it. Never start it, say, in your garage and then close your garage, because you run the risk of getting carbon monoxide poisoning, especially if it's not ventilated. And again, do not touch power lines. They can be potentially deadly if you go and touch an active power line here. So again, you want to make sure you stay safe, not just during the storm, but also after the storm too. As Idalia makes its way over to the northeast, it's going to be gone from Florida by this afternoon. So this is a quick moving situation, but the impacts still are going to be lingering across the Big Bend. And as we're kind of counting down the hours towards landfall here shortly, again, we want to stress that this really is a catastrophic event that is occurring across the Big Bend, and this is historical for that matter, because as we've repeated several times here, this has never happened in recorded history going back to 1851. So about a century and a half ago or so, we have never seen a major hurricane make landfall here, like as we're about to witness here shortly across Appalachia Bay. It is definitely one for the record books and history books here, and not in a good way either. So again, key messages here. You want to make sure at this point you're hunkered down, especially if you're in that extreme wind warning and for portions of coastal Taylor and Dixie counties, as we could be expecting winds upwards of 115 miles per hour plus sustained for several hours or so as the eye makes landfall there in Taylor County right now. You want to make sure you treat that like as a tornado warning, so go to the interior portions of that room. Treat it as, again, as a tornado warning, as we could be seeing winds howling outside upwards of 115 miles per hour. And more than that, so just because that so far the maximum state winds right now are 125 miles per hour, you definitely don't want to get caught up in that. And that will occur for several hours or so as the first eye wall will come through. Then if you're especially from the exact landfall track of it, you might get an eye, and then behind there too, behind the secondary eye wall as it comes in from the back end of Idalia as it kind of comes through the area. So again, if you are caught in the eye, do not walk outside and start taking pictures of everything, because quickly behind it, especially with the forward speed of this storm, it will make landfall, and then we'll have one eye wall, then one eye, and then one eye wall again after that, and this time with winds coming from the opposite direction, again, quickly as this storm is booking it at around 18 miles an hour or so. So this is some pretty serious stuff, folks. You want to make sure you stay well aware as we continue on throughout the next several hours or so as the storm continues to at least make landfall and then go across the state of Florida and then further into the southeast. But I also want to take a look too at some current watches and warnings across Florida here. So I would expect to see some of the watches and warnings begin to expire or be canceled for southern areas of Florida. So Naples, upwards of probably Tampa, I would expect probably in the next several hours. So those will probably begin to subside and to be canceled here. But at least in our area, we are still underneath a hurricane warning for Tallahassee eastward through at least I-75 corridor. And again, we're at landfall site likely in Taylor County, right where my finger's at right here, just off to the southeast of Tallahassee. We have tropical storm warnings in effect off towards the west and the east of where those hurricane warnings are at. So again, even if you're, let's say, in coastal portions of the Emerald Coast, so offshore in Panama City and Destin, offshore near Port St. Joe or Apalachicola, you could still see those tropical storm force conditions possible, as we have, of course, less friction over the water, and therefore we're able to let those winds continue to howl through and speed through as the storm continues to lift off to the north and east. And yeah, definitely don't go out in the water, even if you're not in the path of the storm. You don't want to go out in the water because it could be perhaps pretty dangerous out there. And then all over towards the east coast of Florida, we have those tropical storm warnings in effect from about Naples, kind of crossing the state towards about Melbourne or so, and then northward, upwards into southeast Georgia near Savannah, where actually Savannah itself now is underneath a hurricane warning because we expect this to still maintain hurricane status by the time we get up to that point. And then going northward from there, northeastward into the Carolinas, we also should expect at least right now, tropical storm force conditions possible for coastal South Carolina and then eventually North Carolina about 24 hours or so from now. So here's the GFS forecast wind speeds. Again, this is not really something to watch right now across our area as it's kind of occurring currently it's occurring. with this system moving off towards at least to our east. And same story as well. We should expect that at least clearing conditions with those winds should begin to calm down, relax as we get into the later part of this evening into tomorrow. And then throughout the rest of the week, we should begin to weaken the winds here. And then for the Euro, same story again. Once the storm passes, we should expect those winds to begin to clear out across much of the Big Bend here, or at least over the next probably plus 12 hours from now. Is when we should expect those winds to start to relax, really. So here, the Weather Prediction Center also has given us the risk of potentially some flooding to occur from about Tallahassee all the way through Jacksonville, North Carolina, and into Wilmington, North Carolina, with potentially with a moderate chance of flash flooding to occur, especially where we get training of these rain bands around the center of circulation, where we can have the best chance of seeing the just kind of like a sponge, just raining everything out of those clouds of that atmospheric column above you, and that potentially could lead to some flash flooding, which again refers to quickly rising water, and that could be quickly in and out. So different from river flood warning, but that also could occur too. So I will also stress too that just because you may not be in the moderate risk or in that bullseye, that red bullseye, does not mean you can't see it. It just means your chance of seeing it is statistically less than outside of the area. So just want to clarify that. So even then tomorrow, again, as the storm races off towards the Atlantic, we should expect to see that risk kind of shift along with it. So towards, again, coastal North Carolina, the Outer Banks, we'll see that moderate risk tomorrow as Idalia moves out of here. So GFS rainfall forecast looks like it shifted back a little bit towards the east here, kind of in line with what the Euro has been saying over the past couple of hours or so, with the kind of the heaviest stripe, basically Jefferson County northeastward, kind of indicating where we expect to see kind of the western eye wall to be at, and as we've been showing on radar, where most of the precipitation is located at, which is kind of not really typical of at least many tropical systems, but it's definitely kind of unique for Idalia, but something kind of interesting to look at. And then Euro also basically on top of one another with the GFS, was showing that kind of that stripe from coastal Jefferson County all the way northeastward towards the Carolinas. So these are some of our active alerts regarding storm surge right now. So we have those storm surge warnings in effect still for the west coast of Florida, Big Bend, and then eastern Florida panhandle coastlines there. So this all kind of arcs around the Big Bend there. So so you can see Pasco, Hernando, Citrus, Levy, Dixie, Taylor, and arcing through the Big Bend and into the Forgotten Coast, where we saw those storm surge warnings in effect. At least now they've even been extended upwards into Georgia and the Carolinas as well, with the storm surge warnings in effect for portions of near Georgia upwards into South Carolina, as the system again is going to continue to move upwards in that direction with that onshore flow, as we have the center of circulation right about here where I'm kind of spinning my hands here. That means we have an onshore flow here and kind of right along the coastline here. That could potentially bring not as catastrophic as storm surges we're seeing near the Big Bend, but enough to still cause some flooding across some of those low-lying areas. And zooming in closer into the Big Bend, that all kind of goes through Horseshoe Beach, St. Mark's, Carabel, through about Apalachicola, Port St. Joe is where we see the greatest risk of seeing that storm surge, especially now that we can kind of know where it's going to be landfall. Basically, where the eye right here is at, eastward, is where we see the biggest event of storm surge occurring. So we'll have to watch that over the next several hours or so as it does make landfall. But now we're going to send things over to the wall with more updates on power outages with Chandler.
Thank you for that, Aaron. And yeah, I guess we can spot the hurricane using this map. So we have a lot of colors across the Big Bend, and what those colors are indicating is the percentage of the facilities that are provided power, how many of those have power versus don't have power. The redder the county, the less amount of homes have power. So when we look at Wakulla County, it is one of the brightest on there. Let's actually get some numbers for that county. So we got 10,000 to almost 11,000 facilities, mostly houses, without power. So that is a lot of people that don't have electricity for today. And And, you know, this is basically 2/3 of the residents that live in this county. When we look at Dixie County, it's a very similar story. Over half of, or almost half of the, or basically half, of Dixie County residents don't have power, which makes sense. This is where Cedar Key is. That's a lot of storm surge. So we have the winds brought in a lot of storm surge into Dixie County, causing a lot of the coastal communities to lose power, namely Cedar Key. And then also they had a lot of wind. Of course, the wind was very heavy on the eastern side with this event, and so we expected this, where we saw a lot of counties without power. But even McCulloch County has been dealing with a lot of rain, and so a lot of rain can also mess up electrical systems by weakening the foundation of trees that then collapse even under not very strong winds. So that is something to keep in mind. With Dixie County, Taylor, and Lafayette all on the more nasty, quote-unquote, side of the storm, they all are have high percentages of folks without power. Taylor has nearly half of its residents without power, and then Lafayette a little less than half, closer to a third of residents without power there. Jefferson County also has a decent amount of residents without power. Somewhere around a quarter of residents there do not have power. Even here in Leon County, we have a decent amount of people without power. 1 in every 13 facilities doesn't have power. And we saw a lot of flashes from generators blowing, or from transformers, excuse me, blowing. So that is something to be expected with this event. A lot of these counties are going to continue to lose power. We're going to see this map become redder and redder as the storm continues to make landfall, and possibly that back end of the eyewall causes more damage, although thankfully this storm is more of a hurricane, so a lot of the wind and rain is on the northern half of the storm overall. So that should mean that for the most part what we see with power outages is what we kind of get, but we'll continue to get updates, and inevitably we'll see more and more people without power. Moving on, so we can then look just at what I was talking about with the hurricane. So you can see that there's not really an so like you have the eye wall right here and the remnants of the old eye wall, but you have this end right here, this piece that really hasn't been able to fill in. So residents that get clipped by this might only get a shorter lasting eye wall event. Additionally, the eye wall is not that very strong because it never really got the chance to intensify that portion of the eye wall. But people that get the remnants of the old eye wall will see that it is quite strong right there. So that is something that we are kind of breaking down when we're looking at this type of map. Again, we're expecting this storm to make its way across northern Florida into southern Georgia and go close to the southernmost point of South Carolina before exiting into the Atlantic Ocean. And they'll do all this in the matter of the next 12, 18 hours. We're waiting any time now for this system to be declared on land, a landfall. What counts as a landfall? Well, the NHC basically waits until half of the eye is over land. So as long as they're defining this as the eye instead of the old remnants eye, we are going to see this landfall declared anytime now. Right now, when we have the last frame, basically it's right here, and so about a third, maybe even a little more than a third of the eye is already getting over land, which means that we're going to see NHC probably declare within the next updates, probably maybe at 8 a.m. that we have made landfall. So that is something that we're going to continue to keep track of. But we can also look at some of the results of this event. So we have Jefferson County. We can go over here to this rest stop and look at the video, actually, just to see what some of the, I wonder why that could be the case. There's very likely the case that this, well, that one's not working either. So it's either the website is down or all these cameras are down. Maybe a little bit of both. Let's try over here in Leon County and just see what's going on here. We've started to die down a little bit more, so I wouldn't expect us to see too much in the way of outstanding visuals, but we still got wind, we still got rain. It's quite gusty. You see those branches, they're starting to really flap in the wind, but you know, we're down to tropical storm force gusts. We're not really sustaining too terribly strong winds here, but it's still strong enough that we can continue to see power outages, which we have continued to see power outages. So, and gusts can be just as dangerous. We measure a lot of things with sustained winds, and sustained winds are more scientifically rigorous because we want to make sure that the system does not have like just a pseudo strengthening because of gust. But gusts for people, whenever you're standing here, you're going to feel a gust of wind. It's going to be much more impactful than a sustained wind for a minute. But anyway, we have a lot of the gusts. We have rain littering, raindrops littering the camera, and we have now had landfall declared at Keaton Beach, 125 miles per hour. That is the declared strength. That is a Category 3. It has made landfall. So Keaton Beach, that is our area. Like I said, we were expecting any time now for them to declare because they did consider that big, huge eye to be the landfalling spot. And I am going to say with exasperation that we're probably going to go ahead and close on out here because we've all been here for about 18, 16 hours. I'm really proud of everybody for getting together and doing this. There's a lot of people that you saw multiple times, maybe a few times, but we all have been really trying to give you guys the latest information for here in Tallahassee. But we first started off in the peninsula area, covering the rain bands that were impacting Fort Myers, Tampa, and now even up into Gainesville, and now here in Perry County, or in Perry, and parts of the south in Keaton Beach. So I'm really proud of everybody that worked on this project, basically, and just this has been an interesting experience, and we're really praying for those that have been impacted by the hurricane, and we'll keep you guys tuned, or in tune, hopefully through social media and such. But for now, I think we're going to go ahead and close on out. So thank you guys for watching.